Just a quick few points about the Benjamin Rush Institute. For those of you that we do have a number of people that have joined us for different pieces of our virtual event series. So thank you so much for joining us again. I'm excited that we have a number of students and physicians on this call. We have gone virtual for our event series, as has everyone during this pandemic. And it was fairly easy for us because we were moving towards that for the last couple of years. We have streamed our events through our different chapters throughout the country and the world for a couple of years. So a chapter would have an event, and we would have a viewing party at another chapter in another state and country. Benjamin Rush Institute has been around for over 9 years now, coming in on our 10th year. And our mission is to educate medical students on free market healthcare alternatives that they are just not receiving in medical school. This is so fundamentally important right now because we have seen what overregulation has done during this pandemic. We are part of a great coalition of physicians and patient coalitions that are fighting now to make sure that those regulations are not going to go back into rules in both the state and federal level. And it's vitally important that we make sure that happens because we've seen what will take place. We are so fortunate that we have supporters and just brilliant people that have come to our chapters, which are all over the country, 17 states, three countries besides the United States, to help us educate those medical students. Sometimes our students agree with them, sometimes they don't, but that education is just so important. I say that the reason I do this is because I want to make sure that that burnout rate for doctors that goes higher and higher every single year, we make sure that when they start to hit that burnout, they know where to go. Why I think that our speaker today, it's so important that our students hear what he has to say, besides the fact that he's so accomplished and so brilliant, is the fact that we talk about direct care so much, and we are so behind the direct care movement. But medical students have to see that it's not only direct care that is that they have to go into to support what we do and to support this movement, that there are other ways to do it, that they can see where to go and be advocates for what we do and not be go to direct care, that they can still believe in how we move and not be in direct care. We talk about it a lot, and we're huge proponents, but it's not what they have to do. Dr. Rafael Fonseca is the Getz Family Professor of Cancer, Professor of Medicine, Chair of the Department of Internal Medicine, and Director for Innovation and Transformational Relationships, and Interim Executive Director of the Mayo Clinic's Comprehensive Cancer Center, as well as a consultant in the Division of Hematology and Oncology at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona. After earning his MD in Mexico, Dr. Fonseca completed a residency in internal medicine at the University of Miami in Florida and a fellowship in hematology in medical oncology at Mayo Graduate School of Medicine. He was named a clinical investigator for the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Fund. He is also a visiting healthcare fellow at the Goldwater Institute. Dr. Fonseca's practice has focused on the diagnosis and treatment of plasma cell disorders and leading the multiple myeloma, I said that wrong, team in its efforts to develop a better understanding of the disease and its impact on patients. Throughout his training and career, Dr. Fonseca has received numerous awards and honors. Most notably, he is the Mayo Clinic's Distinguished Investigator, which is the highest academic distinction given to investigators at the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Fonseca serves as reviewer and in editorial capacities for medical publications, so numerous. He has given many national and international presentations for, of course, the Benjamin Rush Institute, which is the biggest. He's a visiting professor, and he's authored over 300 articles, book chapters, editorials, abstracts, and letters. And we are so honored to have him today speaking to us. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Thank you so much for joining us today. 1 second.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. I'm just delighted to be here with you and for the opportunity again to have a conversation as we're going to have. And these are extraordinary times and times that have led to introspection and reflection. And my goal today was just to share some thoughts with you of where we have been, what this incredible change that we have seen with the COVID pandemic means, and where I think medicine is going to go. And again, appreciate the opportunity. And having spoken before for BRI, it's indeed one of the highlights of my speaking career. My goal today, I was going to go through about 4 elements. First, I'm gonna tell you about a case of mine and what could be an average day in the clinic, how that relates to how we're going to see things evolve. I'll tell you a little bit about things we did. I won't spend much time on that, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about things we did at the Mayo Clinic as we prepared for the pandemic. Then I'll talk about some of the specifics on what things we have seen change and how I think they project a much brighter future for medicine, for patients, and for physicians. And lastly, I'll finish by saying that in my mind, one of the key elements to be able to successfully move forward from where we are and to take the necessary next steps so we can get back to what will be, no doubt, a new normal will be through persuasion. So I'm going to walk you through those elements. Just, you've heard I'm at heart, and the most important thing I do, as I describe it, is I see patients as well too. So I have an active practice. And I see patients with multiple myeloma. That's 100% of my clinical practice. So patients come to get opinions, to get treatments, and so forth. So let me just give you a case that I'll use as an example of how this links to some of the changes we're seeing. So this could be any average morning. I get a call that my 11 a.m. patient is late, and that if I could work in the patient into the noontime. And this person has a history of smoldering myeloma, so that is myeloma before it becomes malignant, and the person has not required treatment. And the reason they're late, they're calling me because they normally come through Southwest from California for an appointment, and their plane was late, so they will be seen at noontime, and that was done. We had the time to do that then. But I do recall that I'm looking forward to seeing the patient. I have some concerns about some of the labs. And in a previous visit a couple of years ago, during our first encounter, the patient's husband had said, well, I just wonder if you don't mind that we send you all the information on a regular basis. We can fax you the results of the labs. And if you don't mind, just please call us if something changes. Which is something I could have not done just because of the volume of the patients we see. So it really didn't have a very satisfactory answer on how we could remain connected and still provide the medical care that the person needed, which reminded me too of a comment we once heard in a patient support group of a similar request of a patient saying, if I send my information, how come people are not necessarily looking at it? And the regular answer has been, we do some of that, of course, for patients when they're primary under our care, but it's difficult to do when we don't have that continuous connectivity. And then later in the day, there's another patient that comes from a remote part of the state of Arizona, and this is a person that has to drive. It's about 2.5 hour drive, and the patient wanted to get test results and some consultation. So there I am. I'm gonna meet with this individuals, and as I'm going into the room and I'm thinking about what we're going to do for their case, I need to make sure I have the blood work ready. And unfortunately, some of this blood work does require time before we get the results. So this is blood work that you would need to submit usually at least 24, if not 48 hours before the appointment. So we have that information ready by the time we have our conversation. In my particular case, and this is true for other specialties, and every case is different, I'm just using my example to exemplify the changes we're going to see. Without the lab results, the consultation or the follow-up visit is of low value. It's essentially of no value, because I can't provide any guidance as far as necessary next steps or an evaluation of where the person might be. And then as I reflect of this situation, I think about those two cases. I ask myself, why? Why is that the case? How come I don't have the capacity to monitor someone that I've gotten to know well, but I do have to request that they get on a plane and they come and they see me? Why is it that I have to make perhaps sometimes that person from the remote area of Arizona to drive in advance, sometimes a day ahead, to come here and have the blood work? So fortunately, we thought about this a few years back already. This must be about 6 years ago that we started thinking about these problems. And we found an intermediate solution. And that solution was that, patients could sometimes go to their providers, and, they could find a way through which we could get blood samples sent to our laboratory for testing. And the reason that is of value as well too is because those results would be entered into our medical records. So suddenly we started having a way to connect with patients, but that was exclusively through the lab results. Now, if the patient wanted our interpretation, and that's true across the board for medicine, then we would have to have some dedicated time that we sat down, and either we called them on the phone or more often than not, we would request they come here, they drive or they fly from wherever they're coming. And then we have a conversation and make some recommendations. So we've solved the labs, but we didn't solve yet the need for the patients to come to Mayo. And the reason that has not been something that we have been able to fix, there hasn't been a good solution, is twofold. The first one is that there has been no reimbursement for this type of activities. So historically, for the practice of medicine, if an individual needs to be seen, and there needs to be obviously a generation of charge, and for that money, whichever institution that is, whether it's for profit, not for profit, that generates some revenue that is used, of course, for the facilities, is used for the salaries of the allied health staff, for the salaries of the physician. And with that, then you have an operation that is sustainable. Now, unfortunately, we haven't had this. So over the last several years, what that has meant, and when we start thinking about burnout, for someone who's in a practice, and this would apply for whatever practice someone has, that means that a lot of that work that has been provided, which we have been very proud to do over the year, has been essentially a pro bono activity, an activity that people have done in their lunch hour or have done after hours after they finish with patients. But I think as you can see from what I told you from my conversation with regards to that half of the day of my clinic, we're going to have to take that lunch hour because now we have to also accommodate the patient who's late. So that created a lot of challenges for healthcare system, has created a lot of challenges for providers. And while we have an incredible amount of satisfaction because of being able to do something good for someone, this has all been built on that discretionary effort of physicians. And I am very fortunate to practice in a system where I am allowed and I have the privilege of having sufficient time to see my patients. Just for reference, and this is a technicality, when we see a new patient, we at least get 1 hour to spend with that patient. And when we see a return patient, we normally get half an hour as one of the core aspects of our clinical practice has been this unhurried medical appointment. So the first aspect that has prevented a solution to that has been the sustainability and the revenue. And this is, again, just what is needed to have something that can provide a service. The second aspect of this is, of course, regulatory limitations. So, and this is a little bit more nebulous, but in principle, and before some of the recent changes, it has been impossible for physicians to think of engaging in activities that would cross state boundaries because of the violation of the regulatory elements that require that physicians be licensed in the individual states where they will practice medicine. So, and I say it's nebulous because, of course, if you see a patient consultation, the patient, even, whatever specialty, let's say you're in primary care and one of your patients calls you, they're in a trip, Chicago, you obviously can provide them with medical advice. But then things get pretty fuzzy shortly after that. Can you prescribe? Can you call in prescriptions to pharmacies out of state? Or what if you actually provide an opinion that is substantial beyond just a simple follow-up? Would that qualify as practice of medicine across state boundaries? Now, you add a level of complexity to that, and that is that if you do have patients that are quite ill, now you have to require for them to travel to your center so you can also do that initial consultation. So at least you have that check mark. And obviously that becomes complicated because, the transport of someone who's ill or who has significant health requirements becomes a major challenge when you require supplemental assistance with mobility, oxygen, medications, someone on hemodialysis. You have to coordinate all of that. So it is, no question, a big production. So those are some of the reflections that I have on my day, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to link them as we talk about this post-COVID moment. And as you know, we've been dealing with the COVID epidemic for the last several months. We were now 5 months into the pandemic, perhaps 3 months with more intense preparations. And I want to use this moment just to put a shout out and just a statement of admiration of being part of this profession. The medical profession has risen to the occasion and to the need, like we have not been tested in recent years. And it's just incredible that from my perspective, we saw very active participation from people in whatever their capacity was. And we saw that in individuals in the front lines, sometimes including individuals in training. So we saw that with participation of deployment of healthcare workers to the front line, as we saw in other countries and as we saw here in the United States, as it relates, for instance, to New York City. But we saw a whole range of other activities, that included educational efforts, individuals with expertise in research, involving themselves completely in trying to find solutions. And there will be many stories to be told, but I know the one thread that will link many of those stories was the willingness of people across the board in healthcare to try to provide solutions to what has been, no doubt, a major challenge to both our way of life and a major challenge to the options that we have had for the treatment of patients, given that we have essentially no documented effective treatments for the treatment of the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2. So this happened, and I did mention I wanted to say briefly what we had done, and then how did we react to the changes that came post that. So at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, and what I'm going to say, it's essentially true for all of our locations of Mayo Clinic, also in Florida as well as in Minnesota. We did prepare for what could potentially have been a major surge in the number of cases to come into the hospital. With the stories we had seen, of course, with the northern Italy region and subsequently New York City, anticipating that our hospitals could potentially be completely required, their full capacity would be required for the care of COVID patients. So, and this included logistics and supply chain, and making sure we had the right amount of equipment, sufficient equipment, extensive deliberations about the prioritization for equipment and ways in which we could assure the provision of care as we thought should be provided to our patients. Organizational and operation aspects, such as devising on-call schedules so that people would be available in various ways to attend to those patients as they would be coming into the hospital, with several layers of backup should some of our healthcare workers were to become incapacitated or otherwise ill because of direct infection with COVID. Now, fortunately, we did not see that locally, and our requirement for the provision of health services has not been as high as what we thought. But we didn't know that completely at the time, and we still don't know with certainty what the future will be like, particularly as we're thinking about what the next steps will be in the opening of our economy. We did, however, see that there were a significant number of cases from some of our surrounding communities, including, for instance, some significant increase in the prevalence in individuals from the Navajo Nation that we have participated and tried to assist in their care. We participated with some of our local academic partners, and in our case, Arizona State University, in very quickly bringing up to speed capacity to do testing. And our day was completely consumed with conversations. For instance, sometimes even with simple things like, can we find a partner that can produce the swabs that are going to be needed for the testing for COVID? So again, our hospital has not been challenged to that extreme, but the preparation and the commitment that we saw from everyone in healthcare was there and was palpable. Now, alongside this, we did have a number of things that were happening both at the state and at the national level that immediately allowed us to think about new ways to practice medicine. We, for instance, had to delay some of the elective procedures and some of the elective visits in having the thought process at the time that we had learned that nosocomial transmission of the virus was possible, and then there was potentially a high risk. So we did not want our patients to come into the hospital. And that's okay, of course, if perhaps you're dealing with a hernia that, with proper surveillance, you don't usually have to operate on an emergency basis. But what does that mean if you have a new a breast lump or a suspicion of colon cancer or perhaps some abnormal set of symptoms that would lead you to think that perhaps there's coronary disease in an individual? And I think as time started to go by, at the beginning, there was no doubt uniform understanding of the need to delay some of this procedures. And in my particular case, and the case of myeloma, we actually elected to defer the process of stem cell transplantation for our patients because we didn't know whether we would have the hospital capacity. We didn't know if we would have the intensive care unit capacity should one of the patients require that, or even some things like the blood products to support them through the transplant. So we elected to delay some of that. And again, time has gone by. We have been fortunate that we didn't see that. But now with the opening of opportunities, we started to envision a future of medicine that was certainly not possible a few months back, a future that many of us had dreamt about, and a future and a trajectory to that future that was greatly accelerated 5-10 years because of our need to deal with the COVID pandemic. And I'll give you a few of the examples. So, as you know, because of this need for patients not to come into the hospital, one of the aspects that was promoted was the idea of telemedicine, and that's telemedicine in the form of either a phone consultation or a video consultation. I can tell you most of the hospitals were not ready for this. Most of the hospitals did not have an IT system that could support this. Many hospitals did not have the bandwidth that would support many individuals at the same time being in a video connection with their patients. Most of the hospitals had not thought through all the implications of the security of some of those connections and how did we link this with our medical record and provide an experience that would be good for patients. But many actually solved it, and solved it in a very short time, in a matter of days to weeks, something that potentially could have gone on for months to years in conversations and committees. So now we have virtual consultations that include a video visit with patients. And I'm sure I don't have to explain this, that you can't do that for everything there is in medicine. So you can't operate via a video situation. You cannot conduct a good neurologic examination if you were to do that via video. But could you not think about monitoring, for instance, blood sugars in someone who has diabetes? And in my case, could you not start thinking about ways in which we could remain connected to our patients and provide them that evaluation of the blood work? So technically speaking, that was a major step forward. And I have personally participated in many consultations now that use one of these two venues. Surprisingly, it's been incredibly well received by patients. And we know there's a heterogeneity. There's some patients that prefer not to use video, that they find it cumbersome. They prefer to use telephone. And there are some patients that for certain visits will insist that it be done in person, and that they would prefer to come in and have that consultation with the physicians. As this was unfolding, other things happened in the hospital that were notable. So for instance, because of the risk, we had no visitors. So we found ourselves from an experience where we were seeing patients with a significant other, a son or a daughter or a friend who were in our consults, now being alone, sometimes with a high amount of information occurring in the context of a visit. Well, it turns out now that the videos did allow for as many family members as could fit next to a screen that would want to see it, would want to ask questions. Very quickly, patients know they can start putting some of the points that they would like to ask and their list of questions in the chat box. We found that with telephone, patients quite willingly would immediately start involving perhaps, again, a daughter or a son who lived far away, but who could now more easily participate in a three-way visit. So that has already been deployed, and that's what I meant when we use the title that the genie is out of the bottle. Because I think patients, physicians, and healthcare systems are starting to see the need for not having to have our patients physically present themselves to an institution, exclusively because historically, A, we can't do it because of regulatory elements, and B, because there is no reimbursement. Which leads me to the next point. Payers, including both governmental and commercial payers, have agreed to pay for these services, as they should. So now it turns out that we can offer this to patients. We can complement that with, for instance, blood work. And we can also make it sustainable. We can block the calendars of individuals so they can provide the dedicated time that patients need, so they can have their appointments, but without necessarily physically being present there. So my point here, I think is very clear. I don't want to be redundant, is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. But this really becomes, in my mind, the uber moment in medicine. And we haven't had that moment in a long time, because medicine is complex. I would argue there's some elements in medicine that historically medicine have had a bit of a guild protection. But I think we know we can do better. And I think we know that we can be accessible to our patients in better ways than we were able to do that before. Here at Mayo Clinic in Arizona, a few years back, we had pioneered the concept of telestroke. The concept being that many rural hospitals will see patients with stroke that come from smaller communities, and they would benefit from expert consultation. So we had a neurologist who was available for those patients that would be at the bedside in those small communities. But it turns out we can do that now for everyone. Ironically, that patient of mine that I mentioned in the morning, that morning visit that came from California, probably would have had a much easier time buying a ticket, choosing the airports, connections if some were needed, the seat in the plane, and probably do this in less than 10 minutes. And by the way, knowing the cost of that ticket, than making an appointment for a follow-up consultation with me because of the way we have structured medicine in the past. But I think we have to rise to the occasion. Now, medicine has been historically a profession that because of the asymmetry of information, needed to have some of those boundaries. It was a magisterial profession, and that there was this asymmetry where physicians would know about things, or so we thought. We knew about things, but with a growing explosion of information, patients know more and more, and I would say they often challenge the knowledge of even those who are considered experts in the field. So as you start putting all of these elements together, you can start seeing how we're moving forward towards a more participatory, perhaps let's call it, for the lack of a better word, democratic engagement that is a little bit more level, and that, in my mind, will allow for a better patient care. You heard about direct patient care. I think that has also been an important revelation to many during this pandemic. Unfortunately, many of our colleagues who are in smaller practices who have provided primary care are suffering very significant financial struggles. And in fact, by some estimates, there is a significant risk of a large number of primary care practices to close. But we know as well, too, that there's multiple stories of success of individuals who have the direct primary care, who have already established relationships with their patients, who, at least in spirit, if not technically, have been able to circumvent some of the limitations that I already alluded to before, who then in turn would be more ready to weather a challenge as we have seen now with COVID. Now, there's a bunch of other interesting things and tidbits that I wanted to bring into the conversation that we have learned. I said I'm gonna finish with a few minutes. I'm gonna talk about persuasion, and I'm gonna say persuasion with humility. I think we have learned very quickly that medicine does not know it all, and despite our good intentions, dealing with the problem as we're dealing right now with the pandemic is really a multifactorial, a multi-stakeholder endeavor. We all have learned quite clearly of the limitations of our epidemiologic modeling for what could be the course of a pandemic as this. So I think we have to remain humble, and we have to learn from what has occurred now as far as how do we create structures for better recommendations and better support in future episodes like this. It just occurs to me that there's a very good possibility that things have evolved quite different, of course, as well, too, because of the availability of information. And we have never seen, in my opinion, ever, knowledge grow as fastly, as rapidly, and as expansively for any medical topic as we have seen now for COVID. Everyone who had any link to medicine has been involved, again, in understanding this. A lot of people doing research. Medical journals are saying there's just a deluge of the number of papers that are being submitted. And we went from the initial reports of what could be a very, very significant infectious process at the beginning of the year, to the sequencing of the virus, to a number of papers that are published now in multiple journals, some of them high-level peer-reviewed journals like Cell, where they're doing experiments with drugs that are being tested against the virus. So the speed by which this has occurred is just mind-boggling. I don't think we've ever seen that. And if you go back and you look at the timeline of how things happened for the HIV/AIDS virus, even though it appears to be like the modern world, the timeline that we're seeing now is just is so much faster than was ever seen with the initiation of the HIV and AIDS epidemics. And thus my hope is that as we continue to push forward, we will see more progress in this regard. We have seen, of course, clinical trials that were open in record time and have accrued in record time, including now their publication, for instance, the data regarding remdesivir. And we certainly don't have all the solutions, but we know very clearly there's a large number of clinical trials that are going on And the pathologic optimist inside of me tells me that we will have more solutions in the near future. We have never seen such a race for the development of a vaccine. And the vaccination efforts have been, not in small part, driven by the efforts from the private sector as well, too. So across the globe, we have a number of initiatives with predictions that perhaps there could be vaccines available towards the end of this year, perhaps beginning of next year. We have seen the efforts of virologists allow us to understand the nature of the virus. And we have seen papers that have talked about the complexities of a T-cell response to a virus exposure. And again, we're talking 4 months out. Historically, it took 4 months sometimes just to get a committee going so people could start planning on a research project. So I think it's been a revelation, if you may, of how good we can do things in medicine when we come together and we allow people from the various perspectives to participate in an effort like this. Now, we've seen some things that have also shed light on aspects that I think are of interest to this group. And one example I wanted to bring forward is that of hydroxychloroquine. As I think, I'm sure all of you have seen in the news or have seen in social media, hydroxychloroquine has been tried as a treatment for COVID. And I have never seen in my life a drug become more political than hydroxychloroquine. And you can almost tell what are some of the philosophical or political ideations of people as they're presenting data for hydroxychloroquine. I'll start by telling you what I think about it, and then I'll just break it into some of the examples of what's going on. I think I wish it worked. As any physician, I think I wish we had an effective treatment. I don't think I see the data that tells me that it works, but my only aspiration would be that it worked. But as an example, I'll tell you, when the first reports came out that hydroxychloroquine might not be effective, you could see a celebratory tone in those who were opposing the idea of hydroxychloroquine being an effective treatment, particularly because the current administration was supporting it or providing some words of encouragement that it might be helpful. And again, I haven't seen that as helpful. Can I tell you that it's not helpful? No one can. We don't have the right studies to know that it's helpful or not. And likewise, when you think about hydroxychloroquine, I've seen significant number of posts that tout this benefit without really any substantial data, with essentially a very small anecdotal experience from certain centers. And if anything, I think this should be a reminder to physicians and to scientists of the importance of trying to remain objective as we evaluate these things. Again, I could only hope for it to work. I don't know that I see any data that provides me some promise that it does. And I'm sure you have seen as well, too, that it became such a heated argument that even some of the state boards for pharmacy started precluding physicians from prescribing medications. They sort of, in my opinion, overstepped their authority and said, you cannot prescribe hydroxychloroquine. And there's a long tradition in medicine of allowing that decision to be an exclusive decision between the patient and the physician. Would I prescribe it? Probably not. But I do find it abhorrent that someone gets in the way of physicians being able to use their best judgment as they think about the best treatments for patients. Sometimes these treatments are used in ways that were not traditionally approved, but are considered standard medical practice. They could be part of an off-label utilization of a drug. And that is such an important use of medications. By some estimates in the recent past, up to 50% of oncology is practiced that way, that were you not to do that or offer a patient a treatment along the lines of some of the off-label options, could potentially be considered medical malpractice. So I think when one thinks about the future of medicine, in addition to the regulatory elements and the technical elements, I think there's a likelihood that we will see an enhancement of the thought that the decisions about healthcare should be personal and should be a decision that is made by the individual who's seeking care in conjunction with the advice that they receive from their physician. So you know, I think once one sees that is really just an eye opener as we think about, you know, how we really should conduct ourselves as you all think about the future. And this is not to negate any of the principles of what we cherish regarding the practice of medicine based on best available evidence, the basic principles that we all try to follow with evidence-based medicine. But again, we don't always have the complete set of answers for medical problems, and clearly, again, COVID has been a great example of this. We have seen the rise of something else that I would tell you as medical students, I think it's fascinating, which is the emergence of real-world data. Now, in this world that we live with big data and with accessibility to very large data sets, which in and of itself, we could go down the rabbit hole, and there's a whole number of considerations that must be had, for instance, with regards to privacy. But it's here to stay in many ways, and we see now how some of these reports just have a power that we have not previously seen. For instance, one of the best examples of our understanding of the description of the pandemic came out of a real-world evidence study that was published by a British group, and they presented a paper with 16 million records. So 16 million individuals that were linked to one of their networks, and they could very quickly describe the implications of comorbidities, hypertension, the mortality by age, etc. So again, I'm not here to defend or tout or even discuss the aspects related to some of the concerns that people could have, legitimate concerns regarding the management of that data. But there is no question that in one way or another, you will see more and more some of the studies and the publications that come out of real-world data. We've seen an explosion in our drive for innovation, and we need it more than ever, and we need it at multiple levels, and again, both from healthcare, but also from individuals outside of healthcare. Everyone wants to do something. Everyone wants to contribute. Everyone wants to be participant in the solutions. And we, as much as we've seen the clinical trials I've mentioned, we've worked with partners that work with, apparel companies and that produce sports clothing, and others who are just putting their resources, their thought process, their energy, and their wishes towards finding solutions for COVID. And with that being said, I'm gonna finish with what I think has been missing, and which I would take it would be aligned with what most of us would think when we think about the principles that should guide the practice of medicine, including self-determination and freedom. And that comes because of persuasion. And I've argued recently, and I've sent the link that I think we can put under the video, regarding the lack of persuasion as a failure in this COVID epidemic. So we have had a combination of ignorance, which is we don't know. We're all trying to learn. We're trying to do so in a rapid pace, but we clearly don't know. People and authorities and politicians have come with a desire to do something, but this has led to clashes that I think could have been avoided had we taken the path of persuasion early on. And in my mind, that persuasion needed to start by the acknowledgement of the gaps, by providing some humility, but also assuring individuals that there would be perhaps this attempt to be able to make some recommendations for individuals to decide on their following on how to try to reestablish a normal behavior in the post-COVID era. And just like I talked about chloroquine, this has become highly politicized, and I don't think it needed to be so. The use of face masks in public, whether we should open our economy, whether we should re-engage in school and work, has become incredibly dichotomized. There's this Manichaean perspective of either you're in favor of saving lives, and if you don't do everything you can to save lives, you're essentially just not caring about humans. You care more about the economy, versus the opposite of we just have to open the economy, and perhaps some people will die in the process. And I don't think it had to be that way. I think there was a middle road where individuals could be convinced that we don't know, that there will be a risk, and that we will have to live with a risk for a significant amount of time, that we have to get smart, but that the best way to do so forward is because of our conviction that we're doing the right thing. And I'll just finish by saying, for me, the epitome of the lack of persuasion was seeing that video of a skateboarding park in Venice Beach in California that was filled with sand so that individuals, teenagers, and kids could not dare use it because that would be something that would contravene a disposition of not being out in public. Whether that helped or not, the transmission or not, we don't know. But the message was very clear. We know better than you do. And therefore, just the visual of that became, to me personally, a sore spot. Likewise, seeing the response to that of a community that decides that that is not appropriate, that we want to clean that space, was also inspiring. So thank you. I want to make sure we leave a few minutes if there are questions. I appreciate, again, once more the invitation, and delighted to be back with the Benjamin Rush Institute.
Thank you so very much. I want to thank you personally for being such a proponent of the physician-patient relationship. There's nothing more important than that. And we just thank you as a community for your being such a proponent in everything that you do. We do have time for some questions, and I'm going to, the ones that have come in so far, I'm going to get to those. Some of them are a little bit, they're opposing in a way. So one from some of the students, we've seen, especially with telemedicine and telehealth being everywhere right now.
Sure.
One of the things that we have done is we have been doing some small group sessions with Mercatus Institute and talking about telehealth in a fundamental way and what those changes are going to look like moving forward, as you were speaking about. And what do you think some of those changes need to look like, knowing as you do, as in educating as you do in medical school? What is that going to look like, do you think? What are the biggest changes?
Well, again, starting with the proposition that this should be an option and a decision for patients and physicians. I think they each have to decide if this is the right way to move forward. I would like to see some of the changes endure, particularly as they relate to the regulatory elements. I am actually less concerned about reimbursement because I think I can make an argument quickly of how reimbursement could be contrasted with propositions of value for patients. So here's an example of, if you have to drive here the day before to get your labs, as I explained, and that means that you can drive, but you have to come with a caregiver who has to take a day off of work, and then you start considering gas and you start considering lodging and meals, etc. It just turns out that even though the insurance will pay for the visit, the net economic burden on the person is going to be higher. So I think we have to think about this in a wholesome way. Now, from my perspective, and I think I mentioned the word during my talk, I think this should be an option. What I don't like is to say that this must be the way forward, but I used a real example of a patient that comes every 6 months to see me from Hawaii. I can tell you the first time we saw this, via phone, the first consultation, she's just delighted that A, we can remain connected, and B, she's not going to have to take the days off of work and at her expense to come for that consultation. So for me, perhaps the biggest hurdle would be to make sure that, some of the regulatory changes endure. We will have to see how that happens, over time, just because of the importance of that for the practice of medicine.
So talking about that, so obviously we've seen these emergency regulations that have gone into place, and they've been said that these are in place while the federal emergency is in place, or the state has said these are only in place while the emergency is in place. Have you seen, or could you comment on some that may have not done their job? Maybe some that have to come, that should be back. So any regulations that need to come back, and that's kind of the opposition.
Yeah, no, and well, in particular, what I have seen is the prescribing. I think the prescribing is probably the biggest example. I don't think that regulatory agencies should be in the job of deciding what's the proper treatment for patients. In fact, the argument has been that once a medication goes through a process of approval and it's available in the market, And that in and of itself could be a whole other rabbit hole, right? Or how do we get the approval? To what extent we need to count on efficacy and safety? But once you go through that, I think it should be in the purview of physicians and their patients to decide what is the best treatment that they should receive for their conditions. So I do cringe with the idea that some of that was implemented. And likewise, I can tell you for a fact that the toxicity of, for instance, of hydroxychloroquine is so exaggerated. People are saying this drug is going to kill you. The drug is for the most part safe. The drug is a drug that has been used for many, many years. Is it going to help? We don't know. But you saw something like the Lancet paper that came out that said there was increased mortality. Completely flawed paper because there's a bias that patients that are sicker are more likely to get it. Even traditional proponents of evidence-based medicine cherishing these results, saying, see, we told you hydroxychloroquine should not be available. I don't think so. I think like any other medication, and as we learn more, we need to allow the physicians to be the ones driving the decision-making regarding the prescription.
So going back to, you spoke about clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
Exciting. Very exciting. Where do we lie with, in other countries, drugs are brought to market so quickly, so much faster than usually in the U.S. Where do you believe the FDA is going to be after this? Because we are bringing things to, hopefully bringing something to the public so much faster than normal.
Sure. We'll see in time, and I think a lot of this judgment will have to be retrospective in nature. We have seen a willingness from the FDA to actually act nimbly on some of these requests, and that goes as far as the approval for investigational new drugs and bringing new drugs for consideration. In fact, I myself am involved in a clinical trial where we're repurposing a generic drug. Interestingly, this was an odd story, but it was only available in Japan. It turns out to be an inhibitor of one of the two proteins that is a receptor. This is called TMPRSS2, and we got a rapid response. I think that we are seeing just very, very fast pace with proposals, many of which come from the private sector. Again, with antivirals. The development of monoclonal antibodies, for instance, in one way, it's great that we're trying the convalescent plasma, but this is 100-year-old technology, so we need to get better that we identify the antibodies, so you could give some passive immunity to patients. We're seeing that with inhibitors of interleukin-6, like tocilizumab. So I'm hopeful we're going to be able to have solutions that are going to be short-term, and this willingness to consider a faster path. And one would have to argue, associated with that, there has to be a higher tolerance for risk, at least for the short term, has been good. Yeah.
So going back, to our medical students, and medical students, because we have a few students that are applying to
Sure.
school. We've been told that on the first day of applications, they saw a 50% increase in applications started for medical school since last year.
Really?
Yeah. I say that, and this is me, Rebecca, saying that, and you mentioned that this isn't a powerful time in medicine. I say it's our time in medical schools, because we have just a amazing chance as educators, which Benjamin Rush Institute is an education organization,
Sure.
To influence medical schools and medical students.
Sure.
In all of this. What would you say to a current medical student or someone applying to a school about the future of medicine?
Boy, the only feeling that comes to mind is jealousy. Because I wish I had so many more years to be able to practice with this new world. Our ability to stay connected and to deliver the care and to focus on the right thing and the things that matter to patients is going to be greatly heightened. And that is obviously very palpable. I'm just shocked at the number that you just told me, which is great. because it's inspirational too as well, as we think about, activities that bring meaning to our lives, being participant in the provision of care, helping people, caring for patients, providing treatment was one of the many examples, but is a very tangible example of how humans can fulfill that need for meaning in their life. So I'm just delighted. I'm jealous. I wish I had many more years. I finished medical school in 1991, so it's been about 30 years, and then you add the training on top of that. But I think that the capacity that we have for medicine into the future is great. It will be more challenging. When I was in training, and let's say when I started on my internship, we used to have big white coats on which we carried all these pocket books that had all these formulas and algorithms. And medicine back then was quite primitive. Our books were essentially divided like recommendations or prognostic, indices in a categorical way. More than 4, less than 4, more than 2, more. I mean, the ability to be more precise in your recommendations, to integrate all the variables, the ability to have a very in-depth conversation with someone who is first a person expert, but also knows a lot about the disease, is challenging, but is very, very rewarding.
And that's why we're thankful for people like you who give their time to students and have those conversations, because I think that is what our students need in order to make the decisions of their specialties, but also how they want to practice medicine. Mm-hmm. I think it doesn't happen enough to have those mentoring type conversations, because that is how it's going to influence their practice of medicine. So BRI wants to thank you. Our whole movement wants to thank you. We're butting up on our hour. So on behalf of Benjamin Rush Institute and the entire movement, thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to contact Dr. Fonseca with any questions, because so many of our students watch this recorded, everybody's a little zoomed out right now. Students are just finishing up their finals. So please get in touch with me, and I will get you Dr. Fonseca's contact information. And this is the Benjamin Rush Institute and our virtual event series. We have many more wonderful events in June coming up. And my contact information and all of Benjamin Rush contact information is coming up soon. So thank you very much, Dr. Fonseca. And we will be in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.